In today's video, we're going to talk about microinteractions and we're going to build this. Really quick before we get into it, today's video is sponsored by Atlantic.net. Atlantic.net provides great VPS hosting and they are offering a free 1 gig virtual server with SSDs and block storage for free for a year, plus $25 in free credits to use for other services they offer if you use the link in the description below. It's super easy to use. After I signed up, I was able to provision a new server in less than 30 seconds. They also have incredible reliability and redundancy on their servers. So try Atlantic.net to develop, test, or launch your next project. Click the link in the description below and use the code STACKER to get your $25 in credit. So what are microinteractions? They are small animations that let the user know that something is happening or is about to happen. And today we're going to build an animation inspired by Front-End Joe, who I know from Instagram, and he collaborated with Miriam Isaac to break down the password validator. So here we see a password field next to a button, and when clicked, it fills the element and reveals a validation message. Now they built this in Vue, but we're going to recreate it using vanilla JavaScript. So let's get started. Here I have 3 files, an index.html, style.css, and an app.js. So we're going to start with the HTML, create a boilerplate, and we'll just name this microinteraction password input. All right, let's also add in our CSS. So we'll have a link to style.css. And then in our body, we'll start with a wrapper. Inside this wrapper, we'll put an input. And the input is going to be a password. And there's no need to name it in this instance, but we are going to add an ID, and we'll just say password. After the input, we'll have a button with the class of I. Inside this button, we're going to use some icons, and we're going to use Font Awesome. We'll include the script for that in a minute. So we're going to add an I tag with a class of FAR, and then also a class of FAI. And this one is going to be hidden, so we're going to add a class of hide. We're also going to add an ID on this of OpenEye. Right, and then I'm just going to duplicate this, Alt-Shift down arrow, and this one is going to be not hidden, and it's going to be FA-I- slash. And this will be the closed eye. So we'll just say close eye. Now after that, let's add another button. And this is going to have a class of action. This is going to be our main action button. We're also going to add onto this a data attribute. So we're going to say data content. And this is going to be where we're going to put eventually our validation message. So within this, we're going to have some more icons. So I'm just going to copy this one and we'll paste that 3 times. And these, the IDs will be arrow, check, and times. The arrow will have a class of arrow right. Will be an arrow pointing right, and that's not going to be hidden initially. For the check, will be FA check, and that's a check mark. And then times will be FA times, and that is an X. All right, and so we're going to show and hide specific icons based on the status. All right, now let's put in our script. So we'll start with our Font Awesome script. So we'll say script source, and I'll just paste that in there. So I'm just getting this from cdn.js, and then we'll also add in our script, which is our app.js. We'll get to that in a minute. All right, so I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go ahead and hit go live. I have live server installed, and let's see what it looks like without any styling. It's going to look pretty ugly. All right, something's going on with these. I'm not sure what the issue is. Let's go back. Oh yes, these are not FAR, these are FAS. So let's select those. FAS, let's save that and go back There we go. So we have our password input, we have our open eye, our close eye, our right arrow, check, and X. So now let's get to styling. All right, let's go to the style CSS. First thing that we'll do is set some resets here. We'll say margin is going to be 0, padding of 0, box sizing will be border box, and then let's go on to our body. And we're going to display the body as flex. This is just so that we can center everything in the middle, just make it easier to see. So we'll say align items is going to be center, and justify content is going to be center. All right, and if we save that and go back, we'll see that everything is here in the center, but now to vertically center it, we need to do one more thing, and we'll say height is going to be 100 VH, that's view height. Save that and go back, and now it's all centered here in the middle of our screen. I'm also going to change the font family, and we'll just make that sans serif, that's better than the default. We're also going to say font size is going to be 2rem, and we're going to say background color, and we'll set that to kind of an off-white. Save that, and let's see what that looks like. It's kind of a bluish white. All right, now let's move on, and we're going to style our buttons. So we're going to say button, and button active, and button focus. And we're just going to remove the default. So I want to take the border, set that to none. We're also going to set the outline to none. And we're going to set the font size to inherit. So it will inherit the body font size. All right, we'll save that, switch back. Now it looks a little bit different. All right, so now let's move on. We're going to move on to our wrapper. So this wraps all of our components so far. We're going to position this as relative, set our border to 2 pixels solid. We're going to set it to Dodger blue. We're going to set a border radius of 10 pixels. And then padding on the left, we're going to set to 10 pixels as well. That's just going to push the password input to a bit to the right. All right, so let's save that and let's see what we have so far. All right, so here is our outline, and now everything needs to be organized on the inside. All right, let's work on the input. There's only one input, so I didn't set a class on it, so we'll just say input. We're going to display this in line. Set the font size to inherit. All right, we'll set a border on this of none. Outline is going to be none. And the background color is going to be transparent. All right, we'll save that and let's go back to, now we're getting somewhere. It's looking a little bit better. All right, let's go ahead and add our hidden class. So we'll say hide. All right, so on hide, we're just going to set the display to none. Save that, and let's go back. And so now we're only seeing the I with the slash, so that means we can't see the password. And we have our arrow, which is our main action button. So let's start styling these. Let's start with the I. So I'll put that here. We'll say I was our class. We'll set the display on this to inline block. And we'll set the background color to transparent. We're going to set a padding on this of 5 pixels. And then we'll set a width on it of 50 pixels. And cursor pointer. All right. So now we got rid of, see how the arrow has kind of a grayish background. So we got rid of that background on the eye. And when we hover over it, we have our pointer. All right, now we'll move on to the action button. So that was action. And it's going to be some similar items here. We'll say display inline block. Padding on this one's going to be 20 pixels. Width is going to be 100 pixels. Background, we're going to set that to the Dodger blue. And we'll set the color to white. So that's the color of the font or the color of the icon. We're going to set a border radius of, so now the radius on this, we only want the top right and bottom right to be curved. We want the inside corners to not be curved. Let me go back here. So see the top right and the bottom right, we want the curve, but no curves on the inside. So the radius starts at the top left. So we're going to say 0 on the top left, 5 pixels on the top right, 5 pixels on the bottom right, and 0 on the bottom left. We're going to set the cursor to pointer on this as well. So let's save that and take a look. Much better. Now it's really starting to look good. Now what we're going to do is when we click this, we want the message to animate from here and move out to the left. So we're going to accomplish that by using a pseudo element. All right, so we're going to say action and then before. We're going to set our content to blank. And we're going to set a position on this of absolute. And so we're setting the position on this of absolute because back up here in the wrapper, we had set the position to relative. So when something is positioned absolute, it's absolutely positioned to the nearest relatively positioned element. So we'll say top 0. That's going to make it align top with the wrapper, and left of 0, it's going to align left of the wrapper. We're going to say background is going to be inherit. So it's going to inherit the background from its parent, which is action, which would be a Dodger blue. We're going to set a border radius on this, and now this is going to be opposite. We want the top left and the bottom left to be curved, and we want the right side to not be curved. All right, so it's basically going to be the opposite of this one. So we'll do 5 pixels top left, 0 top right, 0 bottom right, and 5 pixels bottom left. We're going to set a width on this. Width. For now, we're going to set it to 100%. We're going to set a height on here of 100%. We're going to set a transform scale X. And initially, it's going to be 0. That's so it's hidden. And then let's set a transition of transform. So we're setting a transition on the transform of 0.75 seconds. All right, so let's go ahead and save this and check it out. We're not going to see anything yet. So let's move on to our JavaScript. And we're not done with the styling yet. We're going to go back to the CSS in a minute, but let's get started on the JavaScript so that we can see what's going on. So we have 2 buttons. So let's go ahead and start out by getting those. So we'll create variables. Action, that's the main button. Document.query selector, and that's action. Alt-Shift down arrow. Duplicate that, and let's change this to I is the other one. And the query selector on that is I class. All right, so let's start with the action. So we'll say action, add event listener, and we're listening for the click. And we'll just create an arrow function here. All right, so then within this arrow function, we want to animate the pseudo element. So in order to do that, since our pseudo element, it's initially starting with scale X. The pseudo elements are not part of the DOM, so I can't actually target them. So what we're going to do is, instead of setting this to scale X 0, we're going to set this to a custom property, which is also referred to as a variable in CSS. So we'll say variable scale. And let's go ahead and set that. We set that here at the top. So we're going to create a root. And within that, we're going to set a scale custom property equal to scale x 0. Okay, so we set a variable here in CSS. On our pseudo element, we set the transform equal to that variable. And so now we can access this variable in JavaScript and we can change it, which will change it on this pseudo element. All right, so we'll save that. Let's go back here. Now, in order to get that, we need to get our root. So we'll say const root equals document.document element. That's the root. Now to change that, we'll say root.style.set property. And the property that we want to set is scale. And we want to set it to the opposite, which is going to be scale x 1. All right, so let's save that and go back. Now when we click on this, there we go. So it scales, it opens up, but notice that it started from the middle. Let me reset that. It's going to start from the middle and scale outward, and it's actually going to cover this button. So we need to fix those items. Let's go back to the CSS. First, let's start the scale position. So what we want to do is set the transform origin and set it to right. So we want to scale out from the right to the left. So the origin will be on the right. We also don't want the width to be 100% because it's covering the action button on the right side. So what we're going to do is do a calculation. So we'll say calculate 100% minus 100 pixels. So if we look at the action button, the width on that is 100 pixels. So let's save that and go back. We'll reset this. There we go. So now it scales from the right to the left, but notice as it was scaling, there was a line here. Let's refresh the page and try that again. You see the line? All right, to get rid of that, instead of subtracting 100 pixels, we're going to take 1 pixel off, subtract 99 pixels. Save that. Try that again, and now the line is gone, and our button is still visible. All right, now let's look at our message that we're going to show. So the message is actually going to be another pseudo element. So we'll say action after. We'll say content, and the content is actually going to be our data attribute. So we'll say attribute data content. We'll go back to our HTML here, and remember here on our button, we had a data content and we set it to blank initially, right? So we're going to set that to whatever our data content attribute is, and we can change that in the JavaScript. A lot of this is going to be the same, so position, top, and left, those are all the same as the former pseudo element. We don't need a background or border radius. We're going to set the width on this to be 100%. Since it doesn't have a background, it's not going to cover the button. We'll set a height. We're also going to transform the scale. This time we don't care where the origin comes from because it's going to be text, and we're not actually going to transition the transform. We're actually going to transition opacity. And so let's set the opacity here. The opacity is initially going to be 0, but we're not going to set it here. We're going to set it in a variable again. So we'll say variable opacity. And that's so that we can change this opacity in JavaScript since we're dealing with a pseudo element. All right, so back up to the very top here. Let's set our variable, initialize it, opacity. And that's going to be 0 initially. Go back down, and I think the transition on this, we're going to set this to 1 second. I want a little bit more of a delay on the text. Okay, let's save that, and let's go to our JavaScript and see how we can change that. All right, so that's going to be pretty simple here. We have our action item here already, our button. So we're going to say action.dataset.content. content equals, and then we'll say invalid password. And we'll get to the validation in just a minute. What we also need to do is set the opacity. So Alt-Shift down arrow. We're going to, on the root, change, instead of our scale, change our opacity. And that is going to be set to 1. Let's save that and check it out. And there we go. It's slowly faded in, but it is at the top here. So let's work on that. So let's go back to our styles. And to change that, we're going to set a line height. And we'll set it to 4.5 rem. Save that and go back. And there we go. Let's refresh. Nice. All right, so now we need to work on the actual validation, checking to see if the password is correct. So back in our JavaScript, so we need to get our input value. So we'll create a const and we'll call it password. That is going to equal document.getElement by ID. And the ID was password. So now what we'll do here is we'll say if password.value equals, and we're just going to check to see if it's equal to password. Okay, so if it equals password, we're going to set our data content to welcome back. And if it's not, we're going to set it to invalid password. All right, we'll save that and let's check it out. Okay, so I'm going to type in the correct password, password, welcome back. And if I refresh this and I type in some gibberish, invalid password. All right, so now we need to work on the coloring and changing the icon. In order to make things simple, we're going to create another CSS variable. So up here at the top, and we're going to name it color. And initially it's going to be the Dodger blue. So now I can go back down anywhere where we see Dodger blue. We'll set that to the variable of color. I think it was only 2 spots. Okay, there we go. And now we can manipulate the color very easily here in JavaScript using our root. All right, and so if we have the correct password, let's change the color to green. So we're going to say root.style.setProperty, and that's going to be our color. And then we're going to set the color to light sea green. I'm going to copy this and we'll put that down here. If it's invalid, it's going to be tomato. All right, so let's save that and let's go back, check out. And I'm not going to type anything in, so it should change to tomato. Nice. Let's refresh and I'll type in password. And it should change to green. Nice. All right, so we got the colors changing. Now let's work on the icons. So we need to get those icons. So here we'll create another constant and we'll call this arrow. That's going to equal document.getElement by ID. And that was arrow. Let's duplicate that 2 times. So we had our arrow, we have our check, and we have times. So what we're going to do initially is we're going to take our arrow, we're going to say class list.add hide. And let's go ahead and duplicate that as well. We'll change this to, we'll change this to check. And we'll change this one to times. So we're going to hide all of them, and then we're going to figure out which one we want to show. So what we need to do now is to keep track of our state. So in many frameworks, we keep track of state in different ways. In vanilla JavaScript, we can just add a variable that we can keep track of it. So we want to say let open equal false. So we're checking to see if the message is open. Initially, it's false, so it's not open. So now what we can do is we can say if open, what are we going to do? So if it's open, then we need to close it, right? So in order to close it, we're going to set the root style.setProperty. We're going to set the color. And that will be our Dodger blue. So when it's closed, everything is blue. And then let's just shift down arrow a couple of times here. We're going to set our scale. And that's going to be scale X and 0 to close it. Right? And then lastly, we have our opacity. And that will be 0. And lastly, we need to show the arrow. So we're going to say arrow.classList.remove and remove the hide class. All right, so if it's open, that will close it. And then we'll say else. If it's not open, we want to open it, right? And so what we'll do here is we're going to take this password validation portion. We're going to put that in the else. So this is how we open it. So if it's not open, first of all, we want to check our password to see if it's correct. If it's correct, we're going to set our message and we're going to set our color. And then we're also going to now set our icon. So if the password is correct, then we're going to take our check and we're going to class list.remove the hide class. And I'll just copy that and paste that here. And if it's not correct, then we're going to do the same thing to our times class. That's the X. We want to show that, so remove the hide class on that. And now what this is doing, this is opening, right? So we're setting the opacity to 1, we're setting the scale to 1. So those need to go in the else here. And then the last thing that we need to do is keep track of the open state. So we just opened it or we closed it depending on what the current state was. So what we'll do is we'll say open equals the opposite of open, right? So not open. If open is true, then it's going to set it to false. If open is false, then it's going to set it to true. All right, so let's save that and see what we have. All right, so I'm not going to enter a password. Invalid password, and it changed to an X. Now it goes back. Let's enter password. Yeah, and it changes to a check, green, and welcome back. And that's all working perfectly. The last thing that we need to do now is to make the I show and hide our password. So back to the JavaScript, we need to, again, keep track of the state. So we're going to create another constant, and we're going to say let show password equal false. So initially we don't want to show the password. And then we need to add an event listener for the I button. So we'll say I.add event listener. On click, we'll set an arrow function. And we again need to get our password input. So we'll say const password equals document.getElementById. Get element by ID. That was password. We also need to get our open eye and close eye icons. So if we go back to our HTML, you'll see that these were called open eye and close eye. So we'll just alt shift down arrow on those. Password, we'll change this to open eye. And then we'll change this one to close eye. All right, again, we're going to do sort of a similar thing. We're going to say open eye. dot class list. This time we're going to use dot toggle, and we're going to say hide. So when we click it, it's only going to go between one or the other. Alt Shift down arrow, and this is going to be our close eye. And now here's where we're going to use our state. So we're going to say if show password. So if we want to show the password, we'll say password dot set attribute. And we're looking at the type. And we're going to set this to password. If show password is true, then that means we want to do the opposite, right? We're trying to toggle it. So if show password is true, then we want to do the opposite and set the type to password, which is what it is initially. If we look at the input, the type is set to password. And if password is false, then we're going to set the password set attribute and the type, and we're going to set it to text. And lastly, we need to keep track of our state. So we'll say show password equals the opposite of show password. All right, let's save that and check it out. So let's see, password. I don't even know if I spelled that correct. Let's see. Yep, I spelled it correct. And if we hit the I, that shows it. Hit it again and it hides it. All right, so if I mess that up, invalid password. Perfect. So that's a micro interaction. Let me know if you'd like to see more micro interaction videos. Like this video to help me out and subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this.